So good evening. My name's Steve. I'm the Development and Relationship Manager for inHope. This series of Lent meetings came out of some scrambled thoughts in my head. So it's my fault we're here. But I hope that it will be a useful time for you to engage with inHope, to find out a little bit more about what we're doing as a charity, but equally and importantly, actually, to use this Lent as a reflection. Some basic housekeeping, as I've said several times now. The sessions will be recorded. Please turn your camera off if you do not want to be recorded. Please stay on mute. We've muted you all, but please stay on mute unless you want to talk, and there will be a chance to pray at the end. There'll be a chance to unmute yourself to pray at the end as well. That bit won't be recorded, so you don't need to worry about that, but I'll tell you when I've stopped recording at the same time. Chat is encouraged. Some of you have found the chat feature already. If there's any comments or any questions or any thoughts that you wish to share, then please do. Any Bible passages or words that come to mind as we go through the evening, then please feel free to drop them in the chat feature. And my co-pilot, Natalie, will be keeping an eye on all things technical, sharing screens, keeping an eye on the chat, keeping an eye on all the things that are going on. So she'll be keeping an eye on that. Also, this evening, we'll be hearing from Jonathan Lee, our Chief Executive, who's going to be talking about Homes Not Houses, the new housing development that we're about to start working on as inHope. So you'll be hearing about that this evening. And finally, I haven't put this on the screen because it probably doesn't need saying in this audience, but because it's a Zoom and it's a kind of a very public meeting, obviously keep any comments, keep any thoughts appropriate. I'm sure we will always anyway. Because we're all lovely people. So yes, welcome to this evening. The last kind of few months or so, the idea of wilderness has been kind of really important, just in dealing with kind of lockdown and dealing with all the issues and all the challenges that have gone on, and sitting at my computer, looking out the window and gazing out at the world, wishing that I could be out there, has kind of felt sometimes like a wilderness. There's been a few fun things I can kind of browse on and look on the website, and after this, you're more than welcome to look at some of these websites. If you're bored of your view out the window, the window swap is a kind of amazing time filler, time waster, in some would say. But window swap is where people record basically the view out of their window all over the world, whether it's Buenos Aires, Sydney, Moscow, Bristol. People record what's going out their window, and you can flick to randomly any window in the world. So it's kind of a great way of kind of connecting, or a fun way of connecting with people around the world. If you like something a little bit more interactive and you're missing the kind of the tourism, the tourist destinations, Drive and Listen is where you can be the passenger in a car driving around some of the great cities of the world, London, Dublin, Rome, and listen to local radio whilst touring around, seeing all the sites. Clearly, neither website is quite like the real thing, of course, but it helps you remind you maybe that the real world is still out there, and yeah, one day, hopefully soon, we'll be able to see it again. Of course, being able to see parts of the world is not a new thing on the internet. Google Maps has this quite scary ability to project satellite images of your house or wherever, or a street view. And so one of my favorite time filling activities is to kind of look at kind of a satellite view or a street view of places that are familiar to me. So my house, my church, my town, Ashton Gate, for obvious reasons, and kind of trying to date when the photo was taken. The one of my house includes a whole line of nappies that are lying, and reusable nappies that are on the washing line and kind of flapping backwards and forwards, which, given that my children are 10 and 12, kind of dates the photo somewhat, but it's a place that's familiar. And if you look for Jerusalem on Google Maps, there too you will see places that look familiar. Jerusalem itself is much larger probably than what it would have been in biblical times, but there's still some familiar places that you can see on there. Bethlehem to the south. If you start in the middle and work your way out, you'll see Gethsemane on Google Maps. You'll see the Western Wall. You'll see the Mount of Olives. And then if you carry on heading east, You'll come very quickly to a few small disparate towns and then some villages, and then very quickly you'll come to nothing, or rather vast areas of empty space. No settlements, no roads, no houses, nothing for miles and miles and miles. The Judean desert, the wilderness, the place where the Holy Spirit led Jesus to be tempted by the devil, as empty today as it was then. There are many factors, I think, that make the wilderness a harsh environment. Physically, the extremes of temperature, the lack of shelter, shortages of food and water, dangerous wildlife, all sorts of physical dangers. But on top of that, there's the social environment as well, or rather the lack of it. Nobody to talk to, nobody to ask for help, cut off from support, help, and company. I recently read a blog from somebody who was trying to embrace a minimalist mindset by living in the desert for 11 days. He lasted 48 hours, and he said of his experience, of course, there was the physical challenges, like finding drinking water, finding food, but the biggest challenge is your own thoughts and psychology when it's dark, when there's no one around, you can't sleep, there's nothing to do, you're thirsty, you're hungry, and you're incredibly lonely. That experience of being in the wilderness, the challenge of the wilderness. And in Lent, we remember Jesus choosing the wilderness, led by the Spirit, choosing to leave his friends, his family, any comfort he may have had, to prepare for the ministry that was ahead of him. And that's a story that, if she's ready, Esther is going to read for us now from Matthew chapter 4.
Remember to unmute myself. So this is Matthew chapter 4, 1 to 11. Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted there by the devil. For 40 days and 40 nights he fasted and became very hungry. During that time the devil came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become loaves of bread." But Jesus told him, "No, the scriptures say, people do not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city, Jerusalem, to the highest point of the temple, and said, "If you are the Son of God, jump off, for the scriptures say, he will order his angels to protect you, and they will hold you up with their hands, so you won't even hurt your foot on a stone." Jesus responded, "The scriptures also say, you must not test the Lord your God." Next, the devil took him to the peak of a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. "I will give it all to you," he said, "if you kneel down and worship me." "Get out of here, Satan," Jesus told him. "For the scriptures say, you must worship the Lord your God and serve only him." Then the devil went away, and angels came and took care of Jesus.
Thank you, Esther. Bless you. It's a story we're going to hear a little bit about and reflect upon over the next 6 weeks, and that experience that Jesus had in the desert. Exposed, vulnerable, hungry, lonely, scared, isolated. Jesus wasn't spared the challenges of the desert, the extreme of the wilderness, and for 40 days he had no other choice but to turn to his Father who sustained him. By the time the devil came and tempted him, Jesus had already spent 40 days trusting his Father. He'd had nothing. He'd gone without for 40 days. And it had reinforced what he already knew, that his God would be faithful, his Father would be trustworthy, and he had that relationship with his Father that meant he could trust him. And that's traditionally why we as Christians reflect in Lent and maybe give something up, because we're remembering that experience, that process of giving something up to make room for us to trust God, to help us to know that he will sustain us. Except this year, many of us might feel that actually we're already in a bit of a wilderness, that we've already given up enough. Lockdowns, isolation, fear of this worldwide plague has affected all of us, and we've been stripped, many of us, from our human relationships, our normal sources of support, and of our sense, sometimes of our sense of meaning and purpose. And yet, in this wilderness experience, as Christians, we still believe there is hope. Not just in the promises of the politicians or the scientists, but a hope that God will not leave us. He is here among us, all in our own homes, but among us nonetheless, teaching us, helping us to learn, helping us to grow. How has God sustained you over the last 12 months? Often in the Bible, God uses the wilderness experience to bring people closer to him, to teach them things about themselves that they might not have learned, things they wouldn't learn when surrounded by their everyday lives or their friends or their family or all their comforts. And I've heard many views over the last kind of 12 months or so about why God would allow the pandemic. I don't believe that God caused so much death and destruction just to teach us a lesson. I don't believe that. But I do believe that actually when we look back on this time, we will be able to see how he's guided us. We will be able to see how he's changed us and shaped our view of the world, our view of other people. How has God sustained you through the wilderness? And this Lent series, Hope in the Wilderness, will include reflections that bring us to a reminder of that hope that we have as Christians, and the spiritual tools that are available to us that help us to sustain us. Each session will include a reading of the scriptures, of prayer, of reflection, and my hope is that for each of us, it will be a reminder of the hope that we have in God. But for many people in our city, our country, our world, this current time reflects too closely the experience of Christ in the wilderness. Too many go without food, not because they are fasting, but because there isn't enough food in their cupboards. Many face long periods of time alone, not because they are making space to pray or reflect, but because they are without work, or because they cannot see their friends and family, or do not have the digital connections or resources to connect with people digitally. Some go without shelter, not because they are on some sort of spiritual pilgrimage, but because they have no place to call home. And many are fearful that they may lose their home, their shelter, as the economic effects of the pandemic unfold. And yet here too, there is hope. There is hope in a God that still stands and walks alongside his people. And during this series, we want to tell those stories. We want to tell the stories of how God has worked through Christians, through churches, through the work of inHope in our city, and how he brings hope to people who are trapped, living in the wilderness, people who are facing homelessness, hunger, poverty, addiction, trauma, and abuse. So that sets the scene for our series. And there are 6 sessions, each one picking up a different Lenten theme, whether fasting, whether temptation, all sorts of different things, vulnerability of the wilderness. There's different themes that will follow each week. And each session will feel slightly different because of the personalities involved, of the different people who are leading different sessions, but each will remind us of that hope that comes from God. Tonight's session is entitled Protection from the Wilderness, or in the Wilderness. And we start our series by considering what it means to have a home. The reading we're about to hear from Isaiah chapter 58 was written at a time where the people of Israel, the people of God, they did not have that home. They were returning from exile to a Jerusalem that was derelict, that was wrecked. Nehemiah describes it as this in chapter 1. He says, "Those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have burned with fire." And in chapter 2, he says, "The city where my ancestors are buried lies in ruins." That sense of home being wrecked, the heartbreak as we start to read that passage from Nehemiah tells of the importance of home, the importance of home that we still feel today, that importance of having somewhere that's safe, of secure, that is part of a community, that's part of a sense of part of something more, a place where people belong. With no gates and with broken down walls, there would have been very little protection for the remnant that were living in Jerusalem. All the things that would have been associated with a home, safety, security, and refuge were gone. But into this situation, into this wilderness, the prophet Isaiah, writing at the same time, offers a message of hope, which Amelia is going to read for us now.
Thanks, Steve. So it's Isaiah 58, 9 to 12. "Then you will call, and the Lord will answer. You will cry for help, and he will say, 'Here am I.' If you do away with the yoke of oppression, with the pointing finger and malicious talk, and if you spend yourselves on behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then your light will rise in the darkness, and your night will become like the noonday. The Lord will guide you always. He will satisfy your needs in a sun-scorched land, and will strengthen your frame. You will be like a well-watered garden, like a spring whose waters never fail. Your people will rebuild the ancient ruins and will raise up the age-old foundations. You will be called repairer of broken walls, restorer of streets with dwellings."
Thanks, Amelia. God promises the people of Israel that there is hope for them in their wilderness as they come back from exile. Your light will rise in the darkness. The Lord will satisfy you your needs in a sun-scorched land. Your people will rebuild the ancient ruins, and you will be called the repairer of broken walls. God hasn't abandoned them. God is there with them. God will give them hope. But that promise comes with a challenge. And that challenge is to be the hope in the wilderness of others. If you do away with the yoke of oppression, if you spend yourself on behalf of the hungry, if you satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then your light will rise in the darkness. Then the Lord will satisfy your needs. It's both a promise and a challenge, and it's something we're going to grapple with over the next 5-6 weeks or so. We hear the promises of God to each of us, that this Lent, even in the midst of a pandemic, God will be with us. God will bring us out of the wilderness. But we'll also wrestle with that challenge. How can we be hope to others who are trapped in the wilderness? And whilst we hear about the hope that together we can offer through the work of inHope, the connection that brings us all together, there's also an individual element to that too. How can we offer hope to others, to our neighbours, to our people who live next door, to our friends, to our churches? How can we offer hope to others? God does promise to be with us through the pandemic. More than that, God offers to rebuild our lives, our community, our city, our ancient walls, if you will. But it comes with that challenge too, the challenge to be the hope God offers in the wilderness that other people are facing. The two go together, the challenge and the hope go together. I'm going to pray and then I'm going to hand over to Jonathan. Father God, I thank you for your hope. I thank you for your Son, Jesus, and for the Holy Spirit that are with us today. Lord, I thank you that in the midst of all the things that we've gone through this year, you have offered hope. But I thank you too for the challenge that you give us to be the hope for other people, to be the light through which people can see you. So I pray as we grapple and as we find out more and think about the experience of the wilderness and what you can be teaching us, Lord, I pray that we will sense your spirit with us and that you will guide us. Pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. That's enough from me. I'm going to hand over to Jonathan.
Thank you, Steve. And if I can add my welcome and good evening, it's lovely to see so many of you, albeit on two screens on my little tablet. So yeah, it's just really helpful. Thank you, Steve, for that introduction. And personally, I was actually reminded of something that you might be able to see just over one of my shoulders. And there's very small carpet squares that are scenes of the Egyptian desert. We lived in Egypt for 4 years, and that sense of nothingness, that sense of driving for 5 hours and seeing nothing but beige, kind of really came home to me, and I was reminded of that. And it's not a pleasant place, I can tell you. It's hot, and if you don't take water with you, you ain't going to find it on the way. So this evening, as Steve has said, what I want to do is just really give an introduction, quite quick. I'm conscious of giving ourselves time to digest and to pray. I know that you've kind of heard a lot already, so I might pause as I talk, so that you've got time to digest. And I do want to, as I say, I do want to leave enough time for us to just, whether it's in quiet or together, to just pray about the things I'm going to share. That's really important. I will share my screen. I've got some slides, but essentially they're to kind of navigate our way through and give you something to focus on rather than just the screen and my voice. So bear with me while I get that up on screen and get it into the right mode. Come on, there we go. No, not that one. That one. There we go. So there we go. That's back to our desert scene. And I want to talk about this initiative, if you like, Homes Not Houses. And just to kind of give you a sense of where this has come from. This picture might be familiar, hopefully is familiar with a good number of you, but it's the bottom left-hand corner there. It's what I describe as our strategic picture. It's what we are about as inHope. And I'm not going to go through that in any detail at all, but I've just put the magnifying glass over this one area where we've just said housing, and that is a strategic intent, hope and aspiration that we've had for a number of years. 2 words under there: community and move on, or maybe 3 words, but I want to focus on community and just sort of pose some questions. I mean, what does it mean to you and I to have a home? What is it? Is it the bricks and mortar that are surrounding us now, the windows, the doors? Maybe it's the furnishings. Maybe actually they don't matter too much. And what actually gives us that sense of home is the people that are in that building with us, the people, whether that's friends, whether that's part of a community that we live with, whether that's family. They are all expressions of community. And I think home, as was reflected in that reminder of God's people returning to Jerusalem, is also a connection to place. I've just shared a connection to a place, as in we lived in Egypt. That has got massive memories for us and massive meaning for us as a family. If you're on the streets, if you're on somebody's sofa, if you are in and out of night shelters, where is your place? Where do you belong? Where is your sense of community? And I think what sits behind those few words on the screen there is a challenge for us as inHope, and equally you as our prayers, our supporters, is should our hopes for others be any less than they are for ourselves? Should our hope be anything less than a home that has got comfort, that has got warmth, that has got people in that we know and trust, and relationships outside of the home that we know and trust? And I don't think our hopes should be any less than that. And this is what our aspiration is about. We've been thinking about this for a long time, probably some might say too many years, but the beginning of this year, back into last year, beginning of this year, we've really catalyzed our thinking. And we have put together, that's a lot of information on the screen, I apologize. We have framed our thinking around this concept of homes, not houses. We do not, as a charity, want to just get houses and put people in them. What we need is to create homes, places that sustain people and enable people to feel known and loved. And if I just read out that top banner, it says, inviting and supporting the church play a key role in ending homelessness by building healthy and resilient communities through providing sustainable homes for those most in need. And that's pretty chewy, it's pretty wordy, but basically what it's saying is we want to partner with the church in this city. We are not going to do this on our own. And the reason we want to partner with the church is that churches are places in our communities. They are in the community in ways that we as a charity cannot be. And churches, by their very nature, foster community. And so what we're trying to do here, what we're seeking to do, is marry the two things together. Marry church and communities around church with people who need community and need a home. You can see on there that we've linked this into the city plan. I'll talk a little bit more about the how. And we've set ourselves a goal of, let's see over these next few years, if we can provide homes for more than 30 people in this city. Now that will be a significant contribution that the church is able to make to homelessness, ending homelessness in our city. I think the church has got the capacity to do that. I think we have the inspiration. I think we have the leadership of the gospel to do that. The challenge is, are we ready? And are we prepared to get started? So how are we starting? This is a little bit of a pictorial view that we've put together that just describes how we're seeking to work with others on this. And I guess it's a way of visualizing a slightly different way for us of working. This is not about just inHope doing this on our own and creating a team, pulling staff together and doing it in the way that we've always done it. We want to be working very open-handedly and very much in partnership with others around the city. And I'll come to some of those on the screen in a moment. This way of working is really about letting people who have got something tangible to offer do just that. It doesn't matter if they're staff, it doesn't matter if they're volunteers, it doesn't matter if we pay some money for some consultancy work, it doesn't matter if they're partners, it doesn't matter if they're members of a church. If there's something to bring that is tangible and results in achieving the objective, we want to work with you. And we want to work with people, as I say, openly. And doing that equally, this is not about a hierarchy and a structure. This is about bringing together a collective of people. And in doing so, it's actually also about respecting people's own sense of purpose. What is it that they see this is about? It's not about shoehorning everybody into one particular way of thinking, one particular way of working. As I said, I'll come back to mention some of the partners that we've listed on there. But what isn't reflected on there actually is the conversations that we're having with our friends in Beloved, in 61, and we've got shared aspirations in this. We all want to see people housed. We all want to see people in homes that they are able to sustain. So we are talking very openly with those partners around how we collaborate on providing referrals. But just before I move on to some of those partners, it's a very hodgepodge picture, but I've just thrown some words up there that just describe, you might have to turn your screen upside down or something, I don't know, to read some of these, but just to describe some of the, I guess, ways of thinking that we've got, that we want others to have. We want to be creative. We want to see innovation, not for innovation's sake, but because we believe there are innovative solutions to some of the challenges we're facing. We want people to be able to feel that they can take risks. We want passion. We want engagement. This is how this is going to work. Because if we structure it too much and we force people into working together in a way that actually doesn't help them, we won't achieve a solution. This is about being creative in the way that we contribute and how we invite other people into this journey. So just to mention some of those other partners, I'll go around them in sort of clockwise order. Bristol Housing Festival, some of you will know very well. I've been running for a few years now in the city, and they've got some real momentum around innovative solutions to housing. Some of which I'm quite jealous of. I'd love to see us doing things like that. And maybe we will, but maybe we won't. Working with people who are on the cutting edge of creative housing manufacture, solutions that mean that you can put houses above a functional car park, maybe not housing that could go above a functional church car park or church land, then actually there's ways of creating housing capacity that can be turned into homes. Bristol and Bath Regional Capital, we've been in conversation with them for many, many years. They have an aspect of their work called BBRC Homes, in which they're able to draw upon some significant resources, financial, but equally expertise. And they are really making significant inroads into addressing the housing crisis that Bristol faces. And we would be foolish not to partner with them and not to draw upon the expertise that they have. Hope into Action. They're a national charity. They've been working over the past 10 years, very inspirational approach. They work with churches to establish properties that become homes and enable the church to support the people in those homes. Our intention is that we take on a franchise for the Bristol area, we as inHope, that is, which means that we can replicate their model across this city. And that's what this is all about. This is about getting some examples up and running, and I'll come on to those in a moment, so that other people can see how it's done and feel safe with it. And actually we can replicate that. With these partners, we have shared motivations, different ways of doing and different ways of achieving some of those objectives, but our motivations are shared. And actually, as I've described already, there's great creativity and innovation, and I think an ability equally to take risks and try stuff out. And I think we're up for that. We're ready for that. I want to talk a little bit more, perhaps in depth, around church and re-emphasize what I said at the beginning. We as a charity, we as inHope, do not want to do this in isolation. If we did, we would set ourselves up in effect as a housing provider. And yes, we could all argue that based on the people that we see coming through our doors, whether it's through Hope, Wild Goose, our life recovery work, whether it's food bank, we've got enough need right in front of us. But if we simply set up a series of houses and refer people in, actually that's us doing housing, and we become a housing provider. And that doesn't necessarily solve the solution or solve the problem of creating community, creating that environment in which people are known, looked out for, and loved. We can't do that on our own. We want to do it in collaboration with the church. So what does it look like for a church to be involved? Yes, it's coming together and collaborating with us and with others, local and national partners. It's recognizing the uniqueness of each church around the city and what their situation is locally and what the needs would be in that local area, and finding solutions that meet that, not trying a one-size-fits-all solution. And very much this emphasis on working together and seeing that what this is about furthering God's kingdom. And that is at the heart of the approach, and it's the heart of how we're seeking to work together. I'm just going to mention 3 examples, 3 conversations that are running. I'm not going to mention specific churches. We're in conversation already with a church on the east of the city. They've got a little bit of money that they want to invest into property. They haven't got enough to buy a property outright, but that's not necessarily a constraint. They've got a team of people who are keen to be involved, and we're working through with them some questions to see, so what does that look like for you as a church, but equally you in partnership with other churches in your area. We're in conversation with a church in the south of the city. They've got enough money to buy a house outright. They've actually got land. Could that be something that's used for innovative solutions? Again, ongoing conversations with them about what their particular situation could result in. Conversations with a church in the northwest of the city. They haven't got any money, but they've got a track record of working with people on the margins. They've got the capacity to build a team of befrienders who would help tenants sustain the housing, which means they have a home. So those conversations are live, they're ongoing, and it's not that we're working with, these hot leads and that's all. We are listening and taking part in lots of different conversations at the moment, and we're building momentum around this. But as I've said, this is not a talking shop. We are about getting things started and off the ground, I should say. So that's all I want to say, but there's very much prayer that's needed to birth this, to bring this to fruition. And we know that we cannot do this unless prayer happens. And I think the biggest, and I've deliberately put this at the top, I really love to see churches across the Bristol area really catch this vision. We sent a mailing out in January, and we had our first sort of roundtable conversation towards the end of January. That initial communication went out to over 100 church leaders in the city, encouraging them to take part. There are other conversations with the Archbishop of Canterbury's Housing Commission being launched this week, I believe. There are more conversations happening. The time is now to get out of our mode of thinking this is a good idea and knowing that actually there's a gospel imperative, and actually getting out of our chairs and doing it. And some other sort of pointers around there, just reflecting on some of what I've talked about. We'll mention Cathy. So Cathy Knowles, we have engaged as on a contract basis, and she's helping us coordinate this work, bring some shape to and some continuity to those different conversations that we're having. And I think that really importantly for future tenants, that actually what we're giving them is a home and not just a house, and not just accommodation that they fall out of and go back in and around that revolving door again. So I'm going to I'll stop sharing, but I may well put that slide back up again, and I'll hand back to you, Steve, if that's okay.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for those thoughts and that exciting activity that we're working towards. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop recording the session now. So if you're listening to a recording of this, thank you so much for joining us. It means a lot to us that you're able to join us in this way. So do take Jonathan's thoughts and Jonathan's prayer points and hold them for your own intercessions through this week. And we hope that you're able to join us next week.